I get goosebumps all over my body. So I have never ever seen anything like that.
So the theories has been many and creative, but no one has came up with an explanation. Everything is just speculations.
There's a place at the bottom of the Baltic Sea where instruments go silent, where sonar paints a picture that nobody trained in geology, marine science, or oceanography can fully explain without a long, uncomfortable pause. A place that has drawn treasure hunters, professional divers, university professors, and defense researchers to its coordinates, and sent almost all of them away with more questions than they arrived with. For over a decade, the object sitting 90 meters below the surface of the Gulf of Bothnia has been one of the most debated anomalies in modern underwater exploration. It has been called a crashed UFO, a Nazi bunker, volcanic formation, a glacial deposit, and an ancient ruin. Scientists have disagreed loudly and publicly. Documentaries have been made. Expeditions have returned confused. The summer of 2011 was supposed to be routine. Peter Lindberg and Dennis Asperg, the Swedish founders of the Ocean X team, were doing what they always did, scanning the floor of the Baltic Sea for shipwrecks. The Baltic is one of the richest archaeological waters on the planet. Centuries of Scandinavian maritime history are buried in its mud. Hundreds of wooden wrecks in conditions of extraordinary preservation lie scattered across the seafloor, cold enough and dark enough to slow the decay of organic material to almost nothing. Treasure hunters know the Baltic well. Side-scan sonar is their tool, and they know what it shows when it finds a ship: a long, irregular shape, a scattering of debris, the faint silhouette of a hull sunk into sediment over decades or centuries. Recognizable. Predictable. What appeared on Lindbergh's screen that afternoon was none of those things. The sonar return was circular. It was massive, roughly 60 meters in diameter. Its edges were sharp, and not the soft, eroded sharpness of something worn down by the sea over hundreds of years. They were geometrically sharp, with lines that looked almost mechanical. Lindbergh ran the scan again. The image returned the same. He adjusted the instrument settings. Same result. Behind the circular object, stretching across the ocean floor in a dead straight line nearly 300 meters long, was a deep, clean furrow, a trench gouged into the seabed as if something enormous had dragged itself across it and stopped. Asperg later described the moment the crew passed the printout around. Nobody had an explanation. Nobody even had a theory that felt solid. What they had was a photograph of something that did not match anything in their experience, sitting at 90 meters depth in one of the most surveyed bodies of water in the world. The sonar image alone was not enough to draw firm conclusions. Sonar has limitations. Side-scan sonar, in particular, is notorious for producing artifacts, distortions caused by the angle of the sound wave, the nature of the seafloor, and the speed of the vessel. What looks like a sharp edge from one angle can look like a sloping mound from another. What looks like a disk can be a natural formation of rock and sediment viewed at precisely the wrong angle. Martin Jacobson, professor of marine geology and geophysics at Stockholm University, was among the first academic voices to respond. He examined the sonar image carefully. His assessment was measured. He speculated it could be a form of sandstone, but declined to make an official statement without access to physical samples and higher resolution data. That kind of scientific caution is honest and appropriate. But it left the public and the Ocean X team without a settled answer. Finnish planetary geomorphologist Jarmo Korteniemi offered a more specific geological reading. The Gulf of Bothnia, he explained, sits on the Fennoscandian Shield, one of the oldest and most geologically stable continental plates on the surface of the Earth. There is no active volcanism in this region. There has been none for hundreds of millions of years. The runway formation behind the object, the 300-meter trench that looked so much like a landing path, was in Korteniemi's analysis almost certainly a drumlin, a streamlined hill or ridge sculpted by the movement of glacial ice during the last ice age, which ended roughly 11,000 years ago. The drumlin's orientation matched the broader pattern of glacial movement in the region. Similar mounds appear scattered across the same section of the Bothnian Sea seafloor. These were not dismissive opinions. They were carefully reasoned geological interpretations made by working scientists using the best available data at the time. And they might have ended the story entirely if the physical evidence had cooperated. In 2012, the Ocean X team went back. This time they brought divers, and those divers brought samples. Pieces of rock chiseled from the surface of the anomaly were brought to the surface, handled, and handed over to Volker Bruchert, an associate professor of geology at Stockholm University. Bruchert's findings are important precisely because they were both more interesting and more mundane than either side of the debate wanted them to be. The majority of the samples were granites, gneisses, and sandstones. These are exactly the rock types you would expect to find in a glacial deposit in the northern Baltic. They are the rocks the ice sheets carried down from the Fennoscandian Shield during the Weichselian glaciation, the last great ice age advance that carved and reshaped the landscape of northern Europe before retreating roughly 11,000 years ago. There was nothing unusual about most of what the divers brought up. But there was one exception. Among the samples was a piece of basaltic rock, volcanic material formed from hardened lava. Basalt is not native to the seafloor of the Baltic. It does not belong there in the way that granite and gneiss belong there. Its presence, isolated and loose among otherwise predictable material, was genuinely anomalous. Bruchert's explanation was careful. The entire northern Baltic region, he noted, has been so heavily shaped by glacial thawing processes that both the overall feature and individual rock samples are likely to have formed in connection with glacial and post-glacial processes. Glaciers, he pointed out, are not selective. They carry whatever they pass over, and the last ice sheets that covered Scandinavia moved across terrain containing a wide variety of rock types before depositing their loads on the seafloor of what would eventually become the Baltic Sea. A single piece of basalt carried from elsewhere in the region is not, by itself, evidence of anything extraordinary. Swedish geologists Fredrik Klingberg and Martin Jacobsen added further context. They noted that the chemical composition of the samples closely resembled the kind of iron-rich mineral nodules that form naturally on seafloors. Materials including limonite and goethite, both iron hydroxide minerals that form through natural oxidation in oxygen-poor water, can explain certain surface coatings and unusual coloration without requiring any exotic origin. The physical samples, in short, told a story consistent with geology. Not a story without interesting details, but a fundamentally geological story. Here is where the investigation became genuinely uncomfortable for anyone hoping for a clean resolution. The rock samples said glacial deposit, but the divers reported something the samples could not fully explain: the shape. Stefan Hogbaum, one of the Ocean X divers who descended to the anomaly, described encountering surfaces that stopped him cold in the water. Vertical walls that met at precise right angles. Corridors where parallel planes intersected with a geometric cleanliness that erosion, in the ordinary course of centuries, does not produce. A circular hole on the upper surface, surrounded by a raised square rim, a circle set within a square in a configuration that no natural process of erosion, crystallization, or deposition has ever been documented to create. Nature does erode rock into curves, hollows, and gradual slopes. Ocean currents round edges. Pressure cracks stone along its natural crystalline lines. But right angles at the junction of vertical walls, preserved for thousands of years on the floor of a dynamic sea, fall outside the known catalog of natural geological forms. The divers' accounts were consistent across multiple dives and multiple team members. They were not describing a vaguely circular lump. They were describing structural geometry. High-resolution sonar conducted in 2015 by researchers from ABO Academy added one more layer of complexity. Their data suggested that the disc-shaped object was attached to the underlying bedrock rather than sitting freely on top of the sediment. This was not consistent with a free-floating glacial erratic dropped by a melting glacier onto a flat seabed. It complicated the simplest version of the glacial deposit explanation. Underwater archaeologist Andreas Olsson examined the available evidence and concluded that the object appeared to have been cut or molded. He did not claim a supernatural origin. He simply noted that the evidence was consistent with something having been shaped by an intentional process of some kind. The Ocean X team reported something else during their 2012 dives that has never been adequately explained, and that has been the source of more speculation than almost any other detail of the investigation. When the team's equipment was brought within approximately 200 meters of the anomaly's center, it failed. Satellite phones dropped signal. Navigation instruments went dark. Cameras reset without warning. Communication devices lost contact with the surface. When the team pulled back beyond that threshold, everything came back online. The pattern repeated itself across multiple approaches. Inside the zone, devices failed. Outside it, they functioned normally. Dennis Asper described the crew's growing unease as they tested the boundary over and over, each pass confirming the same result. The team named it the dead zone. Now, it is important here to be precise about what the evidence actually shows and what it does not show. Note, synchronized, calibrated electromagnetic measurement logs were released to verify this interference pattern. What exists is consistent eyewitness testimony from multiple crew members across multiple dives, which is meaningful but not the same as scientific measurement data. The interference has never been independently reproduced under controlled conditions with calibrated instruments. Volker Bruchert noted that a rock rich in iron or magnetic minerals might produce minor deflections in sensitive instruments. But wholesale equipment failure across satellite communications, digital navigation, and camera systems simultaneously is a different order of magnitude than a compass nudge. That kind of interference requires active energy output at a scale that simple mineral magnetism does not produce. There is one more layer to this story that most discussions of the Baltic Sea anomaly omit entirely, and it is a detail that has become far more significant in the years since 2012. The Baltic Sea is one of the most electronically contested bodies of water in the world. Russia's Kaliningrad exclave, wedged between NATO members Poland and Lithuania on the Baltic coast, hosts well-documented electronic warfare installations. In October 2024, maritime GPS jamming strong enough to affect flight navigation was confirmed by satellite-based monitoring, with attribution to vessels operating offshore in the Baltic. By 2025, Finland's Coast Guard was routinely tracking persistent GPS interference and AIS spoofing across the eastern Baltic, including incidents involving tankers masking their port calls. In March 2025, the International Maritime Organization, the International Civil Aviation Organization, and the International Telecommunication Union issued a rare joint statement urging protection of vital radio frequencies and calling for curbs on electronic warfare at sea. Here is what the broader scientific record does confirm. And this is where the story becomes genuinely extraordinary in ways that require no speculation at all. In early 2024, researchers led by Jacob Geersen of the Leibniz Institute for Baltic Sea Research published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, one of the most prestigious peer-reviewed journals on the planet. What they described was a stone wall, not a natural rock formation, not a glacial erratic. A deliberately constructed stone wall stretching nearly 970 meters along the floor of the Bay of Mecklenburg in the southwestern Baltic, sitting at a depth of 21 meters, built from approximately 1,500 stones connecting larger boulders in a deliberate linear architecture. Geersen and his team were explicit in their conclusions. The structure was unlikely to have formed naturally. It was unlikely to be modern. The only remaining explanation was that it had been built by human hands. Based on the geological context and the estimated age of the seafloor sediment layers, the wall was constructed approximately 10,000 to 11,000 years ago, during the early Mesolithic period, when the area was still dry land and the Baltic was not yet the sea it became after the glaciers finished retreating and water levels rose. The population of the entire region at that time, Geersen noted, was probably fewer than 5,000 people. Those people built a wall nearly a kilometer long to guide and trap reindeer during hunts. The structure was so effective that the researchers suspect the animals followed it willingly, attracted by linear features in a landscape, unable to bring themselves to cross a barrier even a half-meter high. The Blinker Wall, as it was named, is the oldest confirmed man-made megastructure in European history. Let that settle for a moment. The floor of the Baltic Sea, the same body of water in which the Ocean X team found their anomaly, has now been confirmed to contain deliberately constructed architecture from the Stone Age. The Baltic is not just a graveyard of medieval ships. It is a graveyard of human civilization from a period so ancient that the landscape in which those people lived has been underwater for 8,000 years. The Geersen team also noted that comparable stone formations exist at other locations in the Bay of Mecklenburg and will be investigated. They believe there may be a second, older wall buried beneath the seafloor sediment. This is the point where the Baltic Sea anomaly story stops being a single puzzle and becomes a window into something much larger. On one side of the Baltic, at 21 meters depth, archaeologists have confirmed a human-built megastructure from the Stone Age. On another, at 90 meters depth, a circular formation 60 meters in diameter with anomalous geometry and a 300-meter trench behind it has been examined by geologists who favor a glacial explanation and by divers who cannot reconcile what their hands touch with anything they know about natural rock formation. The glacial explanation for the anomaly is scientifically defensible. The rock samples support it. The regional geology supports it. The drumlin interpretation of the runway supports it. Bruchert's analysis supports it. But the geometric evidence from the dives does not fully support it, and nobody has explained that away. Nobody has produced a credible mechanism by which glacial processes deposited a circular formation with vertical walls, right-angle corridors, and a circular opening surrounded by a square rim. Those specific features have simply been set aside by the mainstream scientific narrative, noted and then quietly left unresolved. A 2019 reanalysis of the original sonar data by Hanuman Singh at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution concluded that the sonar image was a classic case of acoustic shadowing, an artifact of the sonar technology itself, rather than a true representation of the object shape. This is a significant data point. It means the original sonar image that made the anomaly famous was probably not a faithful representation of the object's true profile. But it does not explain away what the divers reported touching at 90 meters in near-zero visibility, with their hands pressed against scorched stone surfaces running at perfect right angles. And it does not explain the basalt. The scientific institutions that have examined the Baltic Sea Anomaly have, almost without exception, approached it as a binary question. Is this a natural formation, or is this something extraordinary? The answer, the consensus says, is natural. Glacial deposit. Drumlin. Erratic. Limonite crust. But the discovery of the blinker wall has quietly opened a third possibility that nobody in the anomaly debate has seriously engaged with. That possibility is that the object is man-made, not by an extraterrestrial civilization or a lost supercivilization of the distant past, but by the same kinds of human communities who built the blinker wall. Stone Age people who lived on the land that is now the seafloor of the Baltic. People who had thousands of years before the waters rose, and who built things. The Baltic was dry land. Hunter-gatherers lived there. They built stone architecture sophisticated enough to herd animals over distances of nearly a kilometer. They had settlements, territories, and engineering knowledge adapted to their environment. When the sea levels rose after the last ice age concluded, everything they built went underwater. The water rose slowly by geological standards, but catastrophically by human ones. Over centuries and then millennia, the landscape that those communities knew was swallowed. Their campsites, their hunting walls, their structures of stone and wood went down with it. Some of those structures have now been found. The blinker wall is one of them. Archaeological surveys of the Baltic seafloor, according to the Gearson team, are still in their early stages. The technology required to systematically survey the full depth of the Baltic at the resolution needed to identify submerged structures did not exist in useful form until recently. High-resolution multi-beam echo sounder bathymetry, the same technology used by Peter Feldens in his 2024 survey of the Bothnian Sea's glacial morphology, can now map the seafloor at resolutions that allow the distinction between natural glacial mounds and deliberate construction. The OceanX story did not end in 2012. After years of sporadic attention and occasional interviews, the organization underwent a significant transformation. In January 2025, Dennis Asperg announced the formation of a new venture, Deep Blue Explorers, built on a foundation of scientific and institutional partnerships that the original OceanX team had never assembled. The summer of 2025 brought a new expedition to the coordinates. This one was different in its composition. Participants included representatives from CQR Robotics, a supplier of advanced underwater autonomous vehicles, and scientists from Stockholm University, including Dr. Beatrice Villaroel, a researcher associated with the VASCO project, which investigates astronomical and observational anomalies. The French research group Sigma 2, which studies unexplained aerial phenomena through scientific methodology, also participated. New data was collected. Sub-bottom profiling instruments were deployed to measure density variations beneath the object's surface, attempting to determine once and for all whether the structure is connected to the underlying bedrock or resting on a sediment layer. The results, as of the time of writing, have not been fully released in peer-reviewed form. What has been reported through expedition accounts suggests the object rests on a sediment layer rather than growing organically from the bedrock itself. If confirmed, this would argue against the simple glacial moraine interpretation, which generally involves formations that are continuous with the substrate they rest on. It would argue for something that arrived at its current location, whether carried by glacial processes, deposited as a dislocated boulder field, or as the minority scientific position holds, placed or constructed. The sub-bottom evidence, like so much evidence connected to this site, does not resolve the question. It just makes the question harder to close. After more than a decade of investigation, 2 separate university geological analyses, multiple expeditions with progressively sophisticated technology, and the confirmed discovery of genuine ancient human megastructures in the same body of water, here is what can be stated with confidence. The Baltic Sea Anomaly is a real physical structure at 90 meters depth on the seafloor of the Gulf of Bothnia. It is approximately 60 meters in diameter. A long, linear trench runs behind it. The rock samples collected from its surface are consistent with glacial deposit material, with one anomalous piece of basalt. The original sonar image that made it famous was likely distorted by acoustic shadowing and does not accurately represent the object's true profile. The prevailing scientific consensus is that the object is a natural geological formation shaped by glacial processes during the Weichselian glaciation. What is also true is that the divers who physically touched this object reported geometric features inconsistent with known natural geological processes. That evidence has not been explained. The electromagnetic interference reported during the dives has not been replicated under controlled conditions, and the Baltic's broader electromagnetic environment has since been revealed to be far more complex than it appeared in 2012. The sub-bottom profiling data from 2025 suggests the object may rest on sediment rather than growing from bedrock. The truth about the Baltic Sea Anomaly is not that it is definitely alien, or definitely a spaceship, or definitely anything that requires abandoning the framework of known science. The scientific consensus says it is geology, and that consensus is not unreasonable. But the terrifying part is this: we are only beginning to look. The Baltic seafloor has been surveyed seriously with modern high-resolution tools for a very short time. In the time since the anomaly was first discovered, that same body of water yielded the Blinker Wall, an 11,000-year-old human engineering project half a mile long that we had no idea existed. The same researchers who found the Blinker Wall believe comparable structures exist at other locations in the Bay of Mecklenburg. Their surveys are continuing. The world's ocean floors cover more than 70% of the surface of the planet. They are, as an environment for archaeological or geological investigation, the least explored terrain in human history. We have better maps of the surface of Mars than we have of Earth's seafloor. The technology to change that has only matured in the last decade, and the discoveries it is producing, even in a relatively small and well-trafficked body of water like the Baltic, are already rewriting the boundaries of what we thought we knew. If the Baltic Sea alone contains a confirmed Stone Age megastructure at 21 meters depth and a contested 60-meter anomaly at 90 meters depth with geometric features that trained divers found impossible to reconcile with natural processes, what is sitting at the bottom of the Pacific? What is sitting beneath the South China Sea, which was dry land during the last ice age and supported human populations whose entire coastal civilizations went underwater when the glaciers melted and the sea levels rose? The terrifying truth is not one object in the Baltic. It is the scale of what we have not yet seen. We have been sailing across the graves of the world for 10,000 years, calling the stones beneath us geology, and only now beginning to learn to read what they actually say.